Welcome to Part 3, Chapters 4 through 6 of Envirian, A Fable for Conservatives the World Over by Joanna Piccioni Hurley, copyright 2016. This video will be about 30 minutes long. Chapter 4, The City Council-Legislature Holds Hearings. The City Council-Legislature decided to hold 2 hearings at the City Hall Capitol building regarding the use of the bug powder during the 3rd week of April. When the day of the first meeting arrived, the farmers and ranchers were ready, thanks to the organizational skills of Bump, True, and Rodeo. One doctor had thoroughly examined all of Tommy Bump's children and grandchildren and found them perfectly healthy. Another doctor had studied at great length the health of Jed True's kids and grandkids. He could find no negative effects from their exposure to the powder in their youth, nor any birth defects in the grandchildren. On the contrary, they were the picture of health. During the meeting, both doctors testified first. Next, Miss Mienten's 3 doctors gave testimony to the purported negative effects of the orange bug liquid on the continent. Then they made the outrageous claim that after careful study of the orange bug powder found on the north side of the island, they could find little difference between it and the deadly orange liquid used on the continent. After all, they were both orange. The crowd attending the meeting made a unified gasp. One of the farmer's doctors was allowed to rebut these ridiculous claims. He noted that though these bug deterrents were both orange, that did not mean that their chemistry was alike in any way. He said, "This orange bug powder is as benign as the yellow." Shortly thereafter, the meeting adjourned. The next day, Tommy Bump, Jed True, and Smarto Rodeo gave testimony themselves. The farmers and ranchers in attendance could not have been more pleased and praised all 3 for their intelligent and persuasive testimony. Miss Mienten then made her accusations of greed and malice toward Bump's Bug Powder Company and True's Hamlet, even though no one from True's Hamlet, including True, made a penny from the bagging of their orange bug powder, it being a community effort and all. After the 5 doctors gave their final testimonies supporting their original claims with additional evidence, the meeting adjourned. The City Council-Legislature spent the next 2 days in closed-door session arguing with each other about the testimony they had heard. A certain pressure on the more liberal members of the council was, unfortunately, prejudicing their decision. The color orange was brought up quite a bit. Finally, the liberals and moderates were able to negotiate an agreement amongst themselves. I say moderates because for many years now it seemed that the once conservative council members had gone the way of the dinosaur and only moderates remained. It was written in the liberal Envirian City newspaper that a ruling was to be announced at City Hall the following day, a Friday. The farmers and ranchers' representatives were at City Hall the next day, including Bump, True, and Rodeo, and leaders of the Conservative Party. Leaders of the Environmentalist Party were there also, including Miss O. Imalia Mienten. And for the first time in a long time, President Mayor President Bliten made an appearance. Bump, True, and Rodeo knew that Bliten had strong political influence over council decisions. The fact that Bliten was there did not bode well for the outcome of this ruling. A few of Bliten's cronies had run for council seats and won, and they always did his bidding. The chairman of the council stood and read their ruling after giving a nod in Bliten's direction. He said, "We, the esteemed City Council-Legislature of the great city and nation of Envirian, after hearing 2 days of testimony and spending 2 days in closed-door session, have ruled that for the protection of our esteemed citizenry and the good of all, the use of the orange bug powder is banned on the entire island, and the use of the yellow bug powder is banned within 5 miles of the borders of Envirian City. Farmers and ranchers may use the yellow bug powder beyond 5 miles, but they must obtain a license to do so from their county seat if they plan to use more than 2 bags in a season. Licenses will cost 100 environs. And E was the symbol of an environ, the paper money of Envirian. The farmers and ranchers were outraged over the ruling. Some protested loudly, but Bump pragmatically recognized that if this had been a negotiated deal, he could not have expected an outcome much better than this. He felt bad for True and his people, and he knew the law was ridiculous and burdensome. But his bug powder company stood to make a lot of money with this law in place. So for now, anyway, he decided not to fight it. Still, if Bump could change anything, it would be getting rid of the license fee. He knew that the fee was going to dampen the profits of his bug powder bagging company, to a small degree at least. True and the farmers of the Kirkland Farmlands were clearly hurt the most by this ruling. Their orange powdery earth in the north was no more dangerous than Bump's yellow powdery earth in the south. But superstition and hysteria, because of a supposed poisonous orange liquid used on the continent, had overruled the scientific testimony of 2 of the island's most esteemed physicians. What were they to do? Travel across the entire island to the south, purchase yellow bug powder from Bump, and cart it back up north? This when their own nearby orange powder was free for the taking. True knew that there was something fundamentally wrong with this ruling, but obey the law he must do. So to change this law, he must consider running for office. When the thought of running for political office first entered his mind, it was like a light went off in his head. Within minutes his mind had firmly settled on the idea, and he knew that there was no turning back. And why wait for a City Council-Legislature position to open up when he knew that President Mayor Bliten's term had only a year and 1/2 left? An election would be held in November of next year. If he could win it, then as President Mayor he would work unceasingly to repeal and reverse this ridiculous and costly law. Smarto Rodeo was simply blown away by the ruling. He had planned to grow his own alfalfa and barley to feed his cattle and horses, but Rodeo ran a tight ship at his ranch by the source of the Misty River near the majestic mountains of Valor. His available funds were allocated for specific necessities, like fence repair, new tack for his horses, and for buying hay from the barns. The money he had allocated for alfalfa and barley seed, including funds to pay a farmer to plow his fields and plant the seed in September, wasn't enough to also pay for the 100 environ license fee and to buy yellow bug powder from Bump. He had planned to get his bug powder free from the red poppy hills. It would have been extra work bagging it himself with his ranch hands, but Rodeo never minded hard work. What he minded was unnecessary government intrusion into his business affairs, especially when that intrusion was based on theory and irrational fear that contradicted the real scientific facts. Rodeo decided right then and there to run for political office and get this law changed. When government becomes a bully by making rules and regulations that are unnecessary and burdensome, the people must rise up and defend their right to live as free people, free from oppressive government oversight on their businesses, home life, and families. It could take as much as 2 years before a city council-legislature seat would become available, he thought. But the presidential term ends next year, when a new president-mayor will be elected in November. It was a long shot. Could he win the presidency? He wasn't sure, but he had to try. He knew he could get many of the ranchers behind him, so that was a beginning. And he was young and strong and could handle the extra work it would require running for office. His 3 sons and 2 daughters, still teenagers, would have to take on more responsibility at Rodeo Ranch, but that would be a good learning experience for them as they grew into the strong young men and women he knew they could become. Chapter 5. The Ruling Causes Division. The day after the ruling announcement, farmers and some ranchers were standing in line to buy bug powder from Bump's Yellow Bug Powder Bagging Company. In mid-April, the infestation of those voracious brown mites was increasing on the alfalfa, barley, and winter wheat, which were now maturing nicely. Buying the bug powder was a necessity if their crops were going to survive. Farmers from the north felt great resentment toward both the city council and Bump. They now had to purchase Bump's yellow bug powder when the free orange powder was readily available in the north. After they had used the orange powder the spring before this insane ruling, it was clear to them that the powder was harmless. But being, for the most part, people of high moral values, they buried their pride and obeyed the new law, purchasing the yellow bug powder from Bump after grudgingly purchasing their licenses, all of which burned a deep hole in their farm's financial pockets. A few of the poorer farmers got the idea to change the color of the orange powder by filtering out the red clay from the orange powder to get down to its pure yellow color. This was a long process, and it was still a tiny bit orange after all that work, but at least it was free. That dadgum City Council-Legislature. Once tested, they presented their idea to Jed True, but he quickly squelched it. He said, "Many of you are my friends, so I cannot advise you to do what my own principles tell me is wrong. For the time being, anyway, this law stands, and we must obey it. But fellas, I'm going to change this law. I'm going to run for president-mayor." The farmers hollered with excitement and patted True on the back. They also promised to obey the law, but I cannot guarantee their promise was fully complied with. There may have been some bug powder used on the island that had a slight orange tinge when viewed in the right light. What could one expect when that dadgum City Council-Legislature had only a 12% approval rating? By summer, the heat had caused those wee little mites to become dormant, but their wee little white eggs lay in the soil, ready to give birth to new bugs in autumn. In early summer, the crops of winter wheat and barley were harvested successfully, which gave the farmers a lot of satisfaction. But all was not well, because the ranchers on the island were unhappy with the City Council-Legislature, with True, and with Bump, because the farmers had raised the price of alfalfa and barley due to their increased costs. Last year, the labor alone, digging up, bagging, crushing, and spreading the orange bug powder on the alfalfa and barley, had raised the price of animal feed. This even when the orange powder had been free in the north, where most of the ranchlands were in the Pachoni Plains. This year, the license fee and costly yellow bug powder would raise the price of alfalfa and barley even more. Then the higher cost of barley and alfalfa, resulting from these new government regulations, was going to cut into the profit that they could make on their beef cattle, unless they raised the price of beef, which they were loath to do. Smarto Rodeo had an idea. He held a meeting with the other ranchers and suggested to them that they formed small communes of 4 or 5 ranches each. They could obtain one license to buy bug powder for each commune and grow their own alfalfa and barley on the communal farms. This would save them money, since the cost to do this would be cheaper than what it had cost them to purchase animal feed, even when the orange bug powder had been free. And here is a nice picture of a rancher herding his cattle. The ranchers loved the idea. They organized themselves so they would be ready for the September alfalfa planting season. They formed communes with their closest neighbors. Each commune elected one rancher to handle obtaining the license and traveling to the south to purchase the bug powder from Bump and cart it back home. They all pitched in money to pay that rancher for his costs. Then in September, they each pitched in labor to plant their communal alfalfa and barley. Rodeo's plan was so successful that he became a highly esteemed leader among the ranchers all over the island, but especially in the Pachoni Plains, where many of the island's largest ranches were. Chapter 6. The City Council-Legislature holds another hearing. Meanwhile, Environmentalist Party members who lived mostly in and around Envirian City were still very dissatisfied with the City Council-Legislature's ruling. Their goal, as directed by Mienten, was to completely eliminate the use of the yellow and orange bug powders anywhere on the island. They doubted that washing their vegetables and fruit was sufficient to prevent exposure to this bug poison. They knew that their small children were even more vulnerable than adults. They had not believed a word the farmers' doctors had said when they had called the bug powder harmless. Not only that, the trade winds that blew over the island from west to east could still carry some particles of the powder from the fields to the patios of Envirian City, coating their chairs and tables, their children's outdoor play toys and sandboxes with a thin, though invisible layer of the powder. Just because they couldn't see it did not mean it was not there, mixed in insidiously with normal dust that accumulated regularly. The environmentalists met together with Secretary Mienten to see what more could be done. Mienten convinced them to reach their goal in graduated steps. Reluctantly, they conceded to her esteemed leadership, except for one man who did not want to negotiate his principles with anyone. His name was Nerty Opposition. That's Zischen with a capital Z, as Nerty was inclined to explain. More about him later. The result of their meeting was that the environmentalists planned another protest rally in the city square and created a flyer to hand out to passers-by. The handout made 6 demands. It began, "Due to our unequivocal commitment to protecting the environmental purity of our beautiful Envirian Island, we, the Environmentalist Party, urge citizens of Envirian to demand that our City Council-Legislature write and enforce the following regulations. 1. In order to prevent particles of yellow bug powder from coating the outdoor living spaces of our beautiful city, farmers and ranchers may not apply the bug powder to crops when the arrows of weather vanes are pointing west and the westerly trade winds are blowing in excess of 10 miles per hour, or when your weighted twine is at a 75-degree angle or lower. 2. Bug powder may not be applied to crops on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, so that city citizens can enjoy a jaunt to the country without worry about exposure to bug powder. 3. Farmers and ranchers may not use more than 1 10-pound bag of bug powder per 1 acre of cropland. 4. Farmers and ranchers must wait 1 week after an application of bug powder before making a second or third, etc. application. 5. Anyone who is found flagrante with any or all bug powder regulations will be fined 25 environs per disobeyed regulation. 6. Anyone who is caught using the orange bug powder will be fined 200 environs. A large crowd in the city square rallied around the Environmentalist Party's new agenda. From their offices in City Hall, the City Council-Legislature in session could hear the cries, shouts, and protests of the rally against bug powder. At President Mayor President Bliten's urging, they decided to hold another hearing on the subject. A week later, in mid-October, a meeting was held at City Hall. Everyone who had skin in the game was there. When the Environmentalist Party's demands were presented, Bum, True, and Rodeo could hardly believe it. They argued that these regulations could cause them to lose control of the fight against these voracious bugs. Suppose there were trade winds above 10 miles per hour for many days. Not only could the wind spread the infestation, but the farmers' and ranchers' hands would be tied to fight against it. They were especially concerned about the upcoming winter wheat crop because the bugs became more active in cooler weather. They feared that 1 10-pound bag per 1 acre would barely be enough to stop these bugs. They worried that these rules could mean that they would lose part of their crop to the mites. After arguments were heard on both sides, the council took a 15-minute break. During that break, moderate members of the City Council-Legislature, formerly known as conservatives, promised the farmers and ranchers that they would not let these new regulations pass. Member and leader Traitor Bain was especially adamant in his promises. Later that evening, the council met in a closed-door session. In the end, to the dismay of all the country folk, somehow the City Council-Legislature passed not 1, not 2, but all of the Environmentalist Party's demands. True commented to Rodeo and Bump, "Well, our conservatives on the council claim to be with us, but after all, they are ensconced in the liberal political environment of Envirian City. Once a conservative moves to the city, it is as if liberalism oozes its way into their minds by some otherworldly form of osmosis." Senor Rodeo answered, "Those conservatives are traitors to the cause of liberty, and I will never understand why liberals call themselves liberals. Liberal comes from the word liberty, but their policies deprive us of our liberty and are slowly eating away at the free enterprise that gave our nation an abundance of farm produce, meat products, and the many manufacturing and service industries of the city. They seem to want to force us to comply with every nitpicky rule their hearts can imagine." Then Bump said, "Yeah, as the liberal environmentalists whittle away at our liberty to do business as we see fit, and as they do that based on lies, don't they even realize that they are shooting themselves in the foot? We provide them with all their fresh food products. If we cannot produce enough food to feed all of them and ourselves, because their rules cause this infestation to gain a hold on us, our island will be forced to import food from the continent. Imported food that is more expensive and less fresh, and the fruit will be less ripe. In the end, the cost of imported food will cause the city's economy to be worse off, just as the farming economy will be. The entire business economy of Envirian Island will deteriorate. We will all be poorer, and we'll be lucky if we don't end up in an economic recession. We need to put Envirian first. Importing food when we can grow it here is a bad idea. But we must have the tools to fight these bugs." Bump was good at putting into words what most of the country folk felt, and he didn't hold back. He was straight up and said what he thought. They loved that about him. The list of new regulations was posted on bulletin boards at every county seat and in every hamlet of Envirian Island. Word went out among the farmers, ranchers, and country folk. They buckled down, submitted to the new rules, and did their best to battle any infestation of bugs found on their crops. And there we have a nice picture of Envirian City Market. Meanwhile, President Mayor Bliten was very happy with the work of Secretary Mienten. He gave her a raise and a new office that looked out over sparkling Nana Bay. He invited her to all his state dinners and monthly musical concerts. He truly hoped that these new regulations would make the need for food importation possible. The importation of food and meat would be the act that would make him a hero to the people of Envirian City. Imagine how my image will grow, he thought, as people show their gratitude to me for saving the city from starvation. And in order to ensure that I protect and enforce our new laws, gifts and funds will continue rolling in from the environmentalists, the food sellers on the continent, and the people of the city. And I will become a very wealthy man. O'Dorn Bliten could not have been more pleased. He wasn't even concerned that his term of office would end in 1 year, because when Mienten would take his place as president mayor, she would make sure that he continued to benefit in gratitude for all he was doing and would do to help her win next year's November election for president. Isaiah 9:16. For the leaders of this people cause them to err, and they that are led of them are destroyed. The Bible. This concludes Part 3 of Envirian, a Fable for Conservatives the World Over by Joanna Hurley. On YouTube, please look for Envirian, a Fable for Conservatives, Part 4, Chapters 7 through 8. You may contact Joanna at joannaforfreedom@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.